Hello everybody. Today we'll talk about the second part of the skeletal tissue, and in this part we will talk about the structure of a compact bone, ossification or osteogenesis. That means the formation of bone. Ossification or osteogenesis occurs in two different ways. Some bones of your body are formed by interchondral ossification, and some bones are formed by intermembranous ossification. So we'll talk about both interchondral and intermembranous ossifications. Then we'll talk about the parts of a long bone, blood supply of a long bone, hormones work on the bone, and the hormones regulate the calcium in the blood. So two types of hormones. Hormones are produced outside of the bone and work on the bone. Also, hormones, some hormones are produced outside of the bone but work on the bone to regulate the calcium. Okay, so we'll talk about those two types of hormones. Then we'll talk about few clinical conditions. First, the structure of a compact bone. I already explained in the tissue section that bone is formed by many columnar structures together. So many columns are bundled together to form the bone or bone tissue. So if you see the bone tissue, you'll see many columnar structures like this, okay, and they are bundled together, okay, and each column is called an osteon, which is the structural unit of compact bone. So each osteon is an unit of bone structure or structural unit of the bone. Okay. So now if I make a cross section like this and see under the microscope, what I will see the osteons like this, circles, right? And each circle is an osteon, okay? And in the center of the osteon, you have a canal called the central canal. Why you have a canal? Through that central canal, blood vessels and nerves pass through. You know that bones are vascular. Bones have blood vessels as well as nerves. So they pass through the central canal. They are located inside the central canal. So each around the central canal you have tiny spaces called the lacunae. So the spaces are called lacunae, and lacunae contains the osteocytes. So each lacunae has an osteocyte, the bone cell. So osteocyte within lacunae, and outside of the lacunae, that means in between the lacunae, you have the hard matrix of the bone, and that hard matrix is called lamella. So lamella is the hard matrix of the bone, which gives the hardness of the bone. So that is the basic structure of the bone. Now let me make it bigger and see more clearly. So this is one osteon. This is the central canal. Okay, and central canal contains what? You already know, the blood vessels and nerves. Okay, so this is central canal. The tiny cavities called the lacunae. So lacunae are nicely, uh, organized inside the osteon, like, circles around the central canal. And so this is a lacunae, and inside the lacunae you have the mature bone cell osteocyte. Okay, so this is the osteocyte inside the lacunae. Okay, it looks like a insect, spider. Osteocyte in lacunae. Okay, and then the spaces between the lacunae contains the hard matrix of the bone. Okay, and that is the lamella. So lamella, the matrix. And also inside the osteon you'll see fine channels, thin hair like fine channels, and these channels connect central canal to lacunae as well as lacunae to lacunae. Why you have these fine channels? Because these channels take the fluid, contains the nutrients and oxygen from the blood to the lacunae, because lacunae houses the osteocyte, and osteocyte needs oxygen and nutrients. Okay, so these fine channels are called canaliculi. Okay, canaliculi. So that is the structure, microscopic structure of the compact bone. Okay, osteon is also called Haversian system, and central canal is also called Haversian canal. Okay, here now you see that inside the compact bone, this is one osteon or Haversian system, this is another osteon. So these are the columnar structures, and this is the central canal here. Okay, central canal. And now if you see under more powerful magnification, you will see these are the blood vessels in the central canal. This is just a chunk of the osteon, not the whole osteon. And you see these are the osteocytes located inside the lacunae. You see here these tiny spaces are called lacunae. Okay, lacunae Na or Nae, both are correct. Okay, and these dark structures you see here, these are the osteocytes. So osteocyte within lacunae. Now, the matrix between the lacunae is called the lamella. So the lamella or matrix between the lacunae within the osteon is called the interstitial lamella. Okay, and the lamella or matrix that covers the whole bone, like here, that is called circumferential lamella. So interstitial lamella is here in between the lacunae within the osteon, called interstitial lamella, and the lamella that covers the whole bone, that is the circumferential lamella. Now, the chemical composition of bone. Bone has both organic and inorganic compounds. Organic compound is called the osteoid. So osteoid is the organic, and mineral salts are inorganic, okay, components of the bone. So bone has both organic and inorganic chemicals. Now, the osteoid or organic compound of the bone consists of the ground substances and collagen fibers. Okay. So this is the column osteon and lacunae, right? Central canal, and now this is the matrix, okay, which has ground substances that includes the proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Okay, so proteoglycans and glycoproteins, you see here, each has two parts: proteo, that means protein part, and glycan, glucose or carbohydrate, same thing here. Okay, glucose and protein, and carbohydrate and protein both are organic compound, right? So this belongs to organic ground substance, and collagen fibers are also organic structures, and the osteoid or matrix of the bone provides tensile strength and flexibility. You know that bone has some amount of flexibility. So if you try to bend the bone, it will bend a little bit before it gets fractured. So that flexibility and tensile strength are given by the organic part of the bone, because it has collagen fibers, and fibers give that flexibility. Mineral salts are inorganic chemicals in the bone, and it forms about 65% of bony mass of the bone. And inorganic compound is mainly calcium phosphate. You must remember, before I mentioned that bone stores huge amount of calcium and phosphate. So these are the main chemicals, inorganic chemicals. And the mineral salts, calcium phosphate, is responsible for hardness, not the flexibility, but the hardness and resistance to compression. Okay. Now just a critical thought. If I remove the mineral salts from the bone, remove the mineral salt, inorganic chemicals from the bone, then you will have only the fibers and organic compounds, chemicals. So in that case, you will not be able to break the bone. Make sense? You can bend it easily. If I remove the organic part of the bone or remove the fibers of the bone, then if I try to bend the bone, it will break easily because the flexibility is not there. Make sense? Because of absence of collagen fibers. Ossification, the process of bone formation, also called osteogenesis. So ossification or osteogenesis, osteo means bone, genesis is formation. So how the bone tissue is formed. You know, when new bones are formed, new bone tissue should be formed, right, to form new bones. When you get a fracture, to heal the fracture, you need the formation of new bone tissue. So to grow the bone, to heal the fracture, you need the formation or production of bone tissue. Now, how the bones of your skeleton are formed in the early part of your life? You know that in very early stage of your life, whole skeleton of a fetus is what? Hyaline cartilage. We talked about this before. So the fetal skeleton is hyaline cartilage. No bone is there. And the hyaline cartilage is converted to the bones. Okay. So most of the bones of your body come from the hyaline cartilage. Okay, so most of the bones of your skeleton come from the hyaline cartilage, and that's why that type of bone formation is called intrachondral, also called endochondral. Same thing. Endo means inside, intra means inside, chondral, same thing, right? Intrachondral ossification or bone formation from the cartilage. You know chondro means cartilage, right? So intrachondral means from inside the cartilage. Same thing, endochondral, inside the cartilage. So which cartilage? Hyaline cartilage of the fetal skeleton. So most of the bones are formed by this way. Okay. However, few bones are formed not from the cartilage but from the membrane, embryonic membrane. Okay, and that's why that type of bone formation is called intramembranous, from the membrane. Okay, intramembranous ossification. Okay, so we'll talk about both. Now Which bones, which few bones are formed by intramembranous ossification? Most of the flat bones, and clavicles. Okay, rest of the bones come from the hyaline cartilage of the fetal skeleton. Okay, so these are two types of ossification or bone formation: intermembranous and endochondral or interchondral or intercartilaginous. Okay, now I'll briefly explain how some bones are formed from membrane by intramembranous ossification. So let's draw a membrane. So this is a membrane, and this is an embryonic tissue. This membrane is formed by an embryonic tissue that is called the mesenchyme. So the tissue, embryonic tissue, mesenchyme, forms a membrane. Okay, and inside that membrane you have embryonic cells, and those cells first produce the connective tissue cells called the fibroblasts. Okay, so the embryonic cells produce the fibroblasts. So these are the fibroblasts. Okay, fibroblasts. Okay, now that is step 1. Then what happens inside that embryonic or mesenchymal membrane? The fibroblasts are converted to young bone cells called the osteoblasts. So some fibroblasts, those are located in the center part, they will be converted to osteoblasts. Osteoblasts. Okay, young bone cells. And you already know that osteoblasts produce and secrete matrix. So these osteoblasts will do what? Will secrete matrix around them. Okay, and initially this matrix is soft, liquid, and then what will happen? It will get hard, and that is the hard matrix of the bone called the lamella, which is the bone matrix. Okay, so after the bone matrix or lamella becomes hard, then what will happen? These osteoblasts will get older, right, as the time passes. And you already know that when the osteoblasts get older, they will shrink. The size will get smaller, right? We talked about that before, and will become what? Mature cells, osteocytes. So these osteoblasts will get smaller, will shrink, and will become old or mature cells, osteocytes. Okay, and since the matrix around the osteoblast was already hard, so when the osteoblast, like this is the osteoblast, okay, I'm just drawing one, and matrix around it, so the matrix got already hard lamella, right? So now if this osteoblast shrinks, gets smaller and becomes osteocyte, then a space will be created between the hard matrix and the osteocyte, because the matrix is already hard. So when the osteoblast shrinks, the matrix will not be able to move, right? So a space will be created here around the osteocyte, and that is what the lacunae. So you see how the lacunae is formed. So now we can say that osteocyte within the lacunae. So that's how the embryonic membrane becomes bone tissue, and that way some bones of your body are formed, most of the flat bones and clavicles, and that's why this process is called intramembranous ossification. Make sense? So just remember those couple of steps. In step 1, I'm quickly uh, reviewing. First, the embryonic tissue membrane uh, or mesenchymal membrane uh, is in the body that has the embryonic cells. They will produce fibroblasts, and fibroblasts will be converted to osteoblasts, and osteoblasts will secrete the matrix, which is in liquid form first, and will become hard to form the lamella, hard matrix of the bone, and then osteoblasts will get mature and will get smaller in size. So a space will be created between the hard matrix and the osteocytes, and that is the lacunae. Now we'll talk about the intrachondral ossification, how the hyaline cartilage becomes a bone. Okay, most of the bones are formed this way. So let me just go over the steps you need to remember. I may ask you to explain the endochondral or interchondral ossification. Okay, so this is a piece of hyaline cartilage in the fetal skeleton. Okay, so this is hyaline cartilage in fetal skeleton. Okay, and like the bone, around the cartilage you have a membrane covering that is called perichondrium. Periosteum, osteo means bone, right? The covering of the bone, and perichondrium, chondro means cartilage. So this is the covering of the cartilage. So this is perichondrium around the cartilage, the covering of the cartilage. And cartilage has the cells, those are called what? Chondrocytes, right? You know, chondro means cartilage, cyte means cells. So everywhere you have the chondrocytes. Chondrocytes. Okay. So first, what will happen? The perichondrium will be converted to periosteum. Okay, periosteum. And periosteum is here now. And in the inner layer of the periosteum, you must remember from last lecture, you have the cells, osteogenic layer or cellular layer, right? Inner layer. So has the cells. Inside the periosteum, in this stage, you have the cells called the osteoprogenitor. Osteoprogenitor cells, embryonic cells. Okay, so here you have in the inner layer of osteum, you have osteoprogenitor cells, and these osteoprogenitor cells will do what? Will become osteoblasts, and osteoblasts do what? You already know, young bone cells, right? They secrete matrix called what? Osteoid, right? The organic part. Osteoid. Okay, so the outer part of the cartilage will become the bone tissue matrix, hard matrix, right? uh, Secreted by the osteoblasts here. So that is called the bony collar, okay, formation. So this is the or bone collar around the cartilage. Okay, so that is step 1. How that happens, I have explained here. Okay, so first bony collar is formed around the cartilage, hyaline cartilage. Then what happens? From that inner layer of the periosteum, the periosteal buds are formed like this. Periosteal buds. You know, in the plant, the buds sprout like that. Okay, so from the inner layer of the periosteum, the periosteal buds are formed. Okay, and the progenitor cells enter into the periosteal buds. So periosteal buds contain progenitor cells. Okay, and you already know that progenitor cells do what? Progenitor cells are the embryonic cells, stem cells. They will become osteoblasts, and osteoblasts do what? Produce matrix. Same thing here. Makes sense? So that matrix will fill the inside part of the cartilage. So this part will be filled by the new matrix, hard bony matrix. Okay, so now you got that. So that is the step number 2. Okay, formation of periosteal buds from the inner layer of periosteum, and they invade into the cartilage, and they contain the progenitor cells that will produce the osteoblasts, and osteoblasts will produce the matrix that will become the lamella. Okay, and then what will happen in the center of the cartilage here? You remember you have the chondrocytes. So these chondrocytes, they are together, and that is called the primary ossification center. So let me draw this part here to make it more like clear. So same thing here. Okay, so we already got the outer part of the bone, bony color here, right? So we got bone tissue here, new bone tissue from the bony color, and we also got the inner part of the cartilage, new bone tissue or matrix from the uh, periosteal buds, right? And now what happens next? The cells, chondrocytes, the cartilaginous cells, they are clustered here in the center, and this area is called primary ossification center. Okay, so these are chondrocytes. Contains what? Chondrocytes. Chondrocytes clustered. Okay, so this area is the primary ossification center, where you have the chondrocytes, cartilaginous cells. What happens here? This is interesting. These chondrocytes will start to get enlarged, bigger, and that is called hypertrophy of chondrocytes. Hyper, P-E-R, T-R-O-P-H-Y, hypertrophy. So chondrocytes, hypertrophy or enlargement will occur. So now see here, if these chondrocytes get bigger, then what will happen? They will occupy more space in the very center of the cartilage. Makes sense? Since they are getting bigger and bigger, so they will occupy more space. And then they will secrete a chemical that is called alkaline phosphate. Alkaline phosphate. Okay, and this alkaline phosphate is an enzyme that helps in calcium deposition. So a lot of calcium will be deposited, okay, deposited in this area. So if this area gets filled with calcium, that calcium is the inorganic compound of the matrix of the bone, right? So calcification will occur here because of the alkaline phosphate secreted from the chondrocytes. And another thing will happen, that's the last thing I will draw here. So you got the calcium deposition inside the bone by the alkaline phosphate, and this is the last thing. So at one point these enlarged chondrocytes, they will get bigger and bigger, occupy more space, right, and will rupture or burst. So now just think that if these cells get ruptured or burst, then what will happen? A cavity will be formed here. Make sense? And that is the medullary cavity. You know, inside the long bone you have a cavity, that is the medullary cavity, okay, that usually contains the bone marrow. Okay, so that is how this shaft part of the cartilage becomes bone. And then what will happen? A blood vessel, you know, cartilage is avascular, no blood vessel inside the cartilage, but bone is vascular. So a blood vessel will penetrate, will enter into the medullary cavity and will branch this way. Okay, so blood vessel will enter into the bone because bone is vascular, bone has blood vessels. Okay, so that's how you get the shaft part. How about the ends? Two ends have the chondrocytes, right, the cartilage cells. They will form two more centers. These are called secondary ossification or bone formation centers. Okay, center. How many? Two. Primary was formed in the center here, in the center of the shaft, right? And secondary are two. They are called secondary because they come after the primary, later. So at the ends of the cartilage, secondary ossification centers will be formed, and the chondrocytes will secrete the alkaline phosphate and the tissue will become bone tissue here from the secondary ossification centers. Now you see here, from two ends bone tissue is being formed from the secondary ossification centers, and from the center the shaft part is being formed, right? So this is the shaft, between these two lines this is the shaft where the bone tissue has been formed, and this is the end where the bone tissue is being formed. And the space in between these two, the shaft and the end, also here where the cartilage is still not converted to bone, that is called the growth plate. You probably heard this name, growth plate. By looking at the thickness of this growth plate, we can determine the age of a growing person. It is used in forensic study or medicine. If you find an unknown person's dead body, and most part of the body has been deteriorated, you can collect the bone and see the growth plate, the size of the growth plate of different bones, because the growth plate thickness is very time sensitive. How much thickness is there at what age of that person, okay, growing person. So it is very time sensitive, so you can pretty specifically tell the age of that person. Anyway, so from the secondary, bone tissue continues to grow, and from the primary shaft, the bone tissue also continues to grow. And finally, a thin hyaline cartilage will remain here. A thin hyaline cartilage will remain in between, and that is called the epiphyseal line, or from outside it is called line, from inside it is epiphyseal plate. Okay, this is a plate of cartilage, thin plate of cartilage that will never be converted to bone, always remain as cartilage. Also, at the end of the bones, the hyaline cartilage will never be, the only thin layer at the end will never be converted to bone like this, and that is the articular or joint cartilage inside the joint at the end of the bone. So that is articular or joint cartilage, always remain as cartilage. What kind of cartilage? Hyaline. So these two structures, articular cartilages that cover the end of the long bone, ends of the long bone, and the epiphyseal plate cartilages will always remain as cartilage. So this is a weak point in your body, in the bone, in the long bone, where the fracture can easily occur because cartilage is not that strong or hard as the bone. Okay, so these are the steps of the bone formation. Okay, now if I just quickly go over, then you will understand. First, the fetal skeleton is a hyaline cartilage, right? So this is one piece of hyaline cartilage that will become a bone. So first, the covering of the cartilage, which is called the perichondrium. Then perichondrium will convert it to periosteum, and inner side of the periosteum you have osteoprogenitor cells, stem cells, and these stem cells will produce osteoblasts, the young bone cells. Osteoblasts do what? You already know, secrete the matrix that becomes hard, right? Matrix of the bone, and that is the bony collar formation, step 1. Okay, then from the inner layer of the periosteum, periosteal buds are formed and invade into the cartilage, and the buds are filled with progenitor cells, again the stem cells, and they will produce osteoblasts. Osteoblasts will produce matrix, okay, inside. So that is the osteoid or matrix. Okay, then that is the step 2. So now in step 3, the chondrocytes in the center of the shaft of the cartilage, chondrocyte cartilaginous cells will hypertrophy, will get enlarged and will occupy more space. At the same time, they will secrete alkaline phosphate. That chemical helps to deposit the calcium. So a lot of calcium deposition will occur in the matrix, okay, newly formed matrix. So that's how the bone tissue will be formed in the shaft part. And then what will happen, since the chondrocytes are getting bigger, enlarged, at one point they will die, they will burst. So a space will be created, right, in the shaft, and that is the medullary cavity formation, okay, medullary cavity. And then a blood vessel, in next step, a blood vessel will penetrate into the bone, into the medullary cavity, and will branch inside it, okay. And in last step, two more ossification centers will be formed at the ends. One is here and another is here. These are called the secondary ossification centers. And these chondrocytes here will produce the alkaline phosphate and the calcification will occur. So that's how at the ends the cartilage will become bone, okay. And the space between the primary and secondary, the growing, parts, the shaft and the ends, is called the growth plate, okay. That will gradually get thin and finally will remain as a thin plate of cartilage, that is called the epiphyseal plate. From outside of the bone you will see just a line, and that is called the epiphyseal line, and inside is the cartilaginous plate, okay. So you must remember this interchondral ossification, how a bone is formed from the cartilage, very important, okay. I may ask to explain this in your exam. Okay, so now you see those I have already explained to you, okay. Blood vessels in a long bone. In a long bone, three sets of blood vessels supply blood: nutrient blood vessels, metaphyseal vessels, and periosteal vessels. Let me quickly draw here. So through the middle of the shaft, the nutrient blood vessels enter and branches like this, okay. So the most part of the shaft gets blood from the nutrients, this one, okay. Most part of the shaft. Only the outer part of the shaft gets blood from the periosteal blood vessel. You remember the covering of the bone is called what? The periosteum, that membrane, right? So inside that membrane, this is the periosteum. Inside the membrane, you have the blood vessels, okay. So that is the periosteal. Periosteal vessels, and it supplies blood to the outer part of the shaft, okay. Only the outer part. Most of the inner part gets blood from the nutrients. So nutrients and periosteal, these two sets of blood vessels supply blood to the shaft part. Then you remember the epiphyseal plate, the thin cartilage here. Through that area, another blood vessel, another set of blood vessels enter, and that is the metaphyseal, and supplies blood to the end of the long bones like this. So this is metaphyseal. Okay, so those are three sets of blood vessels and where they supply the blood to the long bone. Bone remodeling. This is a process that continuously occurs in the skeleton or in the bones throughout the life. Bone remodeling includes the formation of bone, new bone tissue, as well as the destruction of the old bone tissue. And these two things are happening simultaneously throughout the life. In the early part of your life, formation is more than destruction. That's why the body grows, the bones grow and get strong. In the latter part of your life, the destruction is more than the formation. So the matrix is destroyed more than it is formed. So the bones get weak and fragile. So both formation and destruction together is called the remodeling of the bone. So remodeling includes the production or formation as well as the destruction. And the hormones work on the bones. Two types of hormones work on the bones. One type of hormones help to the growth of the bone. So comes from outside and works on the bone to grow, help the growth. Another type of hormones, they come from outside and regulate the calcium in the blood. So those are two types of hormones work on the bones. Some hormones help to grow the bone, some hormones help to regulate the calcium. So which hormones help to grow the bones? Growth hormone. Of course, its name is growth hormone. Comes from where? Anterior pituitary. Okay. This growth hormone directly stimulates the bones and help in the growth of the bone. So works directly on the bone. And lack of growth hormone will cause what? Decreased growth hormone secretion will cause dwarfism. Makes sense, right? And if growth hormone secretion is more than normal during the growth of the body, that will cause giantism. Okay, that's why the normal amount of growth hormone secretion is important for the normal growth of the body or skeleton. Thyroid hormone. This hormone stimulates or modulates the activity of the growth hormone. So increases the activity or enhances the activity or facilitates the activity of the growth hormone. So indirectly helps to grow the bones. Testosterone, estrogen, the male and female sex hormones are released at puberty. Plenty of sex hormones are released at puberty, and that's why you see that the kids grow very fast within short period of time. If you didn't see that kid during the puberty, you will be surprised that how fast the kids grow during puberty. So these sex hormones also stimulate the growth of the bones. So these are the hormones that help to grow the bones. Then which hormones help to regulate the calcium? A thyroid hormone that is called calcitonin. Calcitonin does what? Lowers the blood calcium. Blood calcium. Calcitonin. Okay. Comes from the thyroid gland. And parathyroid hormone comes from the parathyroid glands, does the opposite, increases the blood calcium. Okay, so by the action of these two, thyroid hormone calcitonin, parathyroid hormone or PTH, they work together to regulate the calcium in your blood. If the blood calcium decreases, PTH will be released to increase it. If the blood calcium increases, the calcitonin will lower it. Most of the cases this one happens, and calcium concentration, maintaining the calcium concentration is extremely important in your blood. Okay, now how the calcitonin and parathyroid hormone work? Calcitonin works on the bones and kidneys to lower the blood calcium. You remember, in the bone you have the matrix, right, in between lacunae. So this is the matrix here, and you must remember giant cells, big cells, many nuclei inside and mitochondria. These are called what? Osteoclasts. So osteoclasts are present in the bone. So these osteoclasts love to do what? Destroy the matrix. You already know that. And matrix has a lot of calcium, right? Calcium phosphate heavily stored in the matrix, right? So calcitonin does what? Send signal to the osteoclasts to sleep, don't work, inhibits the osteoclasts. So osteoclasts will not break the matrix of the bone, so the calcium will not come out from the bone. So calcitonin inhibits osteoclasts. So osteoclasts will not break the matrix. So if matrix is not destroyed, calcium will not come out. No calcium released into the blood. So blood calcium will go down. Okay, decrease or lower blood calcium. So that is how the calcitonin works on the bones to lower the blood calcium. On kidneys, this is very simple. If I ask you, your blood has higher concentration of calcium, right? So to lower the calcium in your blood through the kidneys, what you have to do? You have to excrete excess calcium through the urine. So calcitonin helps to do that. Calcitonin works on the kidneys to excrete calcium, excess calcium through the urine. So increases calcium excretion through urine, through the kidneys. That means through the urine. Okay. So if excess amount of calcium is excreted through the urine, then the blood calcium will go back to normal. Will go back to normal. So this is how the calcitonin works. Okay, the parathyroid hormone, just know that, does opposite. That means what? Parathyroid hormone will stimulate osteoclasts, the giant cells. So osteoclasts are activated, stimulated to do what? Increase distraction of the matrix. Makes sense? Just opposite of calcitonin of matrix. And matrix contains huge amount of calcium, right? So from the bone, the calcium will be released into the blood. Calcium release into the blood, and that will increase the blood calcium, just opposite of calcitonin. Okay, so on the bone, calcitonin will stimulate the osteoclasts. On the kidneys, not calcitonin, on the bones, the parathyroid hormone will stimulate the osteoclasts. On the kidneys, same, just opposite, will stop excretion through the urine, stop excretion of calcium through the urine. So calcium will not be able to get out from the body, the concentration will gradually go up. So parathyroid hormone just work in an opposite way on the bones and kidneys. Okay, now parathyroid hormone works on a third organ on which the calcitonin does not work. What is that? Intestine. It does what? Parathyroid hormone increases vitamin D, production. So parathyroid hormone increases the production of vitamin D, and vitamin D will work on the intestine to do what? To increase absorption of calcium from the food in the intestine, from the food you eat. From the food, the vitamin D will increase the absorption of calcium. That means we'll take the calcium quickly into the blood. So blood calcium will go up. So you see that the parathyroid hormone works on the three structures: bones, kidneys, and intestine. Okay. Calcitonin, however, works on the bones and the kidneys. Okay. So if you just read next couple of slides, you will clearly understand what I said. Now, why calcium is very important? I told you that calcium concentration in your blood must be maintained between 9 to 11 milligram per 100 milliliter of blood. Within that narrow range. If it goes below 9, it is called hypocalcemia. Above 11, that is called hypercalcemia. Both are dangerous. Now, why calcium in your blood is important, in your body is important? Calcium helps in nerve signal transmission. You know that your nervous system controls the functions of the body. Very important. Calcium helps in muscle contraction. So if hypocalcemia occurs, the calcium decreases in the body, then muscle paralysis. The muscles will not be able to contract. You will not be able to move. You will not be able to breathe. Coagulation of blood. Calcium is essential for blood coagulation, blood clot formation. Okay, so if you remove the calcium from the blood, then the blood will not clot. Calcium helps in secretion of hormones from the glands and neurotransmitters from the nerves. Calcium also helps in cell division. So those are few important functions of the calcium. We have already talked about the calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. So here you see the normal range of calcium in the blood. If calcium goes down, parathyroid glands, these are parathyroid glands, will secrete parathyroid hormone. Okay, and that will work on those three organs: the bones, osteoclasts of the bones, kidneys, and intestine through vitamin D. Okay, last thing we'll talk about is the fracture of the bone. We often hear the term fracture of the bone. We name the fractures or describe the term based on the location, the appearance from outside, and the nature of the break. So those are the three things we see to identify the type of fracture. This type of fracture is called comminuted fracture. Usually occurs in older people. What is the nature of this fracture? You see, in this area, multiple fracture has occurred. So not a single, you have multiple fractures. So this is called comminuted fracture. In the same area, multiple fracture. Compression type fracture usually occurs due to vertical pressure. You know, your body weight is transmitted through the vertebral column or spine, and these are vertebrae, the bones. So if you take heavy weight or you jump from height, the pressure on the spine or vertebral column is created. Which way? The vertically. So that is the compression type fracture will occur in the vertebrae. Okay. Spiral fracture is an oblique fracture, like not transverse, it is oblique. You see here, oblique fracture due to twisting force. Okay, so that's how the spiral fracture looks like and occurs due to twisting pressure. Epiphyseal fracture, this one you already remember, that when the bone growth is formed, the bone is formed from the cartilage, a thin plate of cartilage remains as epiphyseal plate. Okay, so that is a weak point. So fracture occurs in that area, that is epiphyseal fracture. Depressed fracture, if after the fracture the broken piece of bone inverts into the deeper tissue, that is depressed. Like if something falls on your head, the broken piece of skull will go inside the brain, towards the brain, that is depressed. Green stick occurs in young children. The bone is more flexible, so a partial fracture occurs. In most of the cases, a partial fracture occurs. So this is the bone. The fracture is not complete, just a part, and then from that one branches occur. So this is green stick type fracture. Okay, so those are the things you need to know from this part of the skeletal tissue. Okay, thank you.